a member of the board of the BSA, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here to BSA Space on behalf of both the BSA and BSA Foundation, which are both sponsoring this event tonight. Tonight's series is part of the Designing Boston series, which provides a forum on current trends in architecture and urban design that will shape our city in the future. Designing Boston panels take place every other month. Tonight's discussion is being filmed, as you'll see, by the Forum Network at forum-network.org, in case you guys want to watch it again. But there are also other ones that are going to be available, including the Olympics from last time and future ones. The topic tonight is defining innovation, something that has been on the minds of many in our architecture community for the past few years, from Mayor Walsh's call for bold design that reflects our culture of imagination, to Robert Campbell's critique that the innovation district nearby has all the charm of an office park in a suburb of Dallas. I took a long walk yesterday in that area of the city, and I think he's pretty spot on, unfortunately. We can do better than we've been doing in the past. I think we need to innovate more. But this is much more of a problem than architectural aesthetics. It has to do with urban vitality. It has to do with questions of economics as well. And I think we sit in a room where it's possible to think more about this future of our city in innovative ways and the possibilities of triggering new economies for ourselves. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the mayor just announced the 2015 biennial winners. It's a program that I've been a part of. And these are the kinds of thinkers who I think can bring new shape and new energy to the city, and a group that we should be involving more often in the shaping of the future of our city. With this said, we're blessed with an incredible set of resources of a design community as well as an educational community where people come here from all over the world and think great things inside the classrooms of our city. And one of the questions we might talk about tonight is how we can bring those innovative discussions out into the streets and the shape of the city itself. In that discussion, we'll be joined by Michael Ross, who many of you might know. He's a familiar face and name from many experiences. Mike has solved complex problems and brings disparate parties together as a legislator, as well as now in practice as an attorney at Prince, Lobel, and Ty, where he focuses on real estate, strategic advice, and government relations. His work has national implications as well. Most recently, he has been appointed by President Obama to serve on the Council of the United States Holocaust Museum. Mike served for 14 years as a Boston City Councilor, a body which he also presided as president. In 2013, he entered the race for mayor, sharing a bold vision for the city's future, and I hope he'll provoke us with some of those thoughts again tonight. Mike regularly writes an opinion for the Boston Globe, and just today he had an excellent piece on innovation in techniques of construction, particularly looking at modularity, where he spoke about a wave of professionals pushing for new ways to build Boston. Seems like an inspiring place to start the conversation. And Mike, thanks very much for leading us tonight.
Thank you, Mark. Innovation. Wired magazine has called innovation the most important and overused word in America. Important because it is the blueprint for unprecedented economic development. Overused because, well, everyone wants unprecedented economic development. But innovation, which stretches across all disciplines, design, music, commerce, housing, is a tricky one to define, much less claim, especially in the built environment. As designers and architects, and when we walk into this room, we're all designers and architects, how does one design for innovation? More to the point, what does it say that the most innovative progenitor of, for example, rock music in Boston was in a dank, dark, dimly lit back room of the Rat in Kenmore Square, which in its heyday was open from the mid-70s until the late 90s, and certainly had no aesthetic design principles to it. What does it say that the most innovative building here in the design district is actually a 1.5-story building outside called District Hall? What does it say that the building, which in fact is the most relevant architecture in this area, the ICA building, what does it say that it's now no longer visible, having been blocked by nondescript, non-innovative structures walling off its view corridors? Are areas of stunted design capable of repair? Kendall Square, which once languished as a no man's land, a neighborhood of white elephants. It's now a place where interesting spaces and places abound. The pedestal of the Prudential Center, once a ghost town, and now, thanks to one of our panelists, who may talk about this, attracts pedestrian engagement. So yes, you can repair. It is possible. In a nutshell, what is innovative design, and how do we create innovation from it? Thankfully, I don't need to answer this question today, but these panelists who are here will. And we have an amazing group of panelists, and I'm just going to keep the conversation going and then get you in on it as soon as they each do their presentation. So starting with, we have Ted Landsmark here. Ted Landsmark is a board member of the Boston Redevelopment Authority. Sorry, there we go. He is the former president of the Boston Society of Architects, Boston Architectural College, and more importantly, he's just a smart, great leader in our city. In the future, Ted will be working, in the near future, Ted is working on a really exciting design activity, kind of spurred by what Mayor Walsh was talking about, and he hopefully will share a little bit of that with us today. Shauna Gillies-Smith is a landscape architect and a public artist. She's a teacher, a scholar, with degrees from British Columbia, Harvard School of Design, and tonight she is going to be teaching all of us. Brian Koop, my pal, Senior Vice President and Regional Manager of the Boston office of Boston Properties. Brian brought cool into his company by assembling buildings with purpose and interest, this being one of them. And I can't wait to hear his presentation. And Rob Rogers of Rogers Partners in New York, a wildly respected among his colleague architect, and now known for redesigning the security bollard on the Washington, D.C. Mall, which is, I want to hear about. These are your panelists. So we're going to get started with our friend Ted Landsmark. Ted?
Okay. Thank you all for coming tonight. Let me start with an announcement of the Ideas Conference, which will be taking place here in Boston on the evening of May 6th. That's a Wednesday evening, and then all day on May 7th. The kickoff event is scheduled to take place in Faneuil Hall. The mayor will be there, and then on the day of the 7th, we will be here in these spaces at the BSA to talk about innovation and innovative design. For me, tonight's slide presentation and conversation is a trailer, in effect, a little bit of a teaser for what we will be talking about on that day. And on that day, we'll be bringing together from Boston and Europe and other parts of the country, designers and developers and students and community people to talk about innovative design. Now, how did that come into being, and why did this come into being? I attended the Chamber of Commerce breakfast where the mayor announced that he wanted to see more innovative design in Boston. And it is true that I am a board member of the Boston Redevelopment Authority, but as I remind everyone, as a board member, I operate on a policy level. and not on an operational level. I don't run day-to-day operations. So as much as folks have come to me to ask me how much I've changed the BRA, I have to remind them that my job is to raise questions and then to have a staff, a large experienced staff, move forward with making whatever actual changes may take place. So when the mayor announced at the breakfast that he wanted to see more innovative design in Boston, I went to him and I asked him, what do you mean? And he gave me a smile and he said, well, you were happy I said it, weren't you? Mm-hmm. And I said, yes, I was. And then off he went to do what mayors do. It struck me that, in fact, we had been presented with an opportunity to have a wider dialogue about what innovative design would be in Boston. What, in fact, should we think about, particularly in relation to the fact that the BRA at this moment is moving forward with a comprehensive planning process, which will be the first overall planning and zoning process that has taken place in the city of Boston since 1964, 50 years. And particularly given that we will soon see an audit that was commissioned of planning functions, and we don't know what that audit will say, but almost certainly it will raise questions about how the city thinks about and is planning itself forward. So the conference, which I hope you'll all be able to attend, the conference is designed to get wide input and really to challenge us on what innovative design could be. Ordinarily, we as designers think of the bird cage, or we think of Rem Koolhaus, or we think of fancy projects done by starchitects in remote locations. We think of buildings that startle and shock and look like overgrown sculptures within a landscape. But in fact, from my perspective, design innovation takes many forms beyond the formal in and of itself. I think we need to think about sustainability and resiliency, all of the effects of climate change, which I know Brian will talk about, green design, and what we do with renewable energy. We need to think about new building materials and methods. As our moderator pointed out this morning, we have a lot to learn from Legos and modularity. We need to think about building performance. We need to think about the application of digital technologies and data mining, the development of apps. As I remind everyone, if 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, we had thought about how people move around the city of Boston, and we had started to develop a planning model in that regard, the odds are we would not have calculated that Uber would have the kind of impact that it has in terms of changing the way we think about movement within an urban environment. And we need to think about big data as a design tool. MIT folks have been pulling information from people's cell phones for at least 15 years and using that for planning purposes. And we need to think about transportation and smart transportation, and we need to think about regionalization. And Mayor Walsh has been a very strong advocate for reminding us that simply moving a biotech industry from Cambridge to Boston really doesn't much change the net value of what it is we're doing to attract new development to the city. We need to think about harbor access and what it is that makes our harbor attractive to people. I always think in terms of the family that lives up on Fort Hill. What would make coming down to the waterfront attractive for that family? How do we position what we do around landscape and historic preservation, both of which are integral to what has made this city distinctive from many others? And then we need to think about who's here. We have the youngest city in the country at this moment in terms of age and in terms of changing demographics and in terms of the changing nature of families. And we need to think about accessibility. Many of our spaces along the waterfront and elsewhere simply are not accessible. We need to think about economic equity. We need to think about designing for health and well-being, what enhances the health of our population, what gets people out and walking. And we keep talking about ourselves as a city that is positioned for global prominence, not just around the Olympics, but as a city that many people come to for school and for medical care and for technology. What does it really mean to have a city that thinks of itself as global, but has a public transit system that shuts down at 1 or 1:30 in the morning? What would it mean if we wanted to have an adult entertainment site, such as the Melkweg in Amsterdam, which is open all night and provides all kinds of jazz and film and other kinds of entertainment? Where would we put such a place if we were in fact a global city? And so I would ask that we consider some simple initial interventions, not all of which cost a lot of money. Placemaking and wayfinding and technology. Here, for example, the well-known entrance to LAX, the airport in Los Angeles, designed by Selbert Perkins, who I thank for helping put this slide production together. And other cities around the world where simple iconographic structures, not that different from the Arch in St. Louis, come into being in a way that help to identify neighborhoods. Those of you who've been around will remember the orange lollipops, the sculpture that used to be located in downtown. If you didn't know where to tell someone to find you, you'd say, "Meet me at the lollipops," and everyone knew where that was. Yeah. We look at cities like Atlanta and Dubai, where placemaking have become major subjects of interest and intervention. We look at Buckhead in Atlanta, the way it has come to be a place that people clearly identify. We look at Qatar. We look at City Creek, Salt Lake. Places that we don't normally think of as being places that are places. And yet, as we all know, if you don't know where the waterfront is in Boston and you are on Federal Street, you can't find it. MIT. Wayfinding. My favorite example of wayfinding that doesn't work is coming out of the Ted Williams Tunnel and confronting a set of signs, one of which says Worcester 90, one of which says 93, and one of which says South Boston. But where you really want to go is either the Cape or Maine. Right. And none of those signs indicate to you where north is and where south is. And so wayfinding in a city like Boston becomes a major subject where one doesn't necessarily have to spend huge amounts of money in order to get people around and give them a sense of where they are and where they're going. Union Station here. And then the use of technology. And technology has changed all of our lives. I don't think there's an individual in this room who not only doesn't have, but doesn't use on a regular basis her or his smartphone, device, whatever one wants to call it. It integrates maps and it integrates tools to find places. 5 years ago, no one would have expected that Airbnb would become the largest hospitality company in the world. And why does it work? Because it gets us to overnight housing quickly through our smartphones, and it does so with a facility that was unimaginable even 5 or 6 years ago. So the way technology is now applied for planning purposes is totally different than would have been anticipated just a few years ago. And the way we use technology is now integrated across platforms in ways that have changed for all of us the experience of the city, the way we interact with the city. Our smartphones are now the user-friendly interface with the city in a way that maps, in a traditional sense, once might have been. I used to love to find people standing on street corners in downtown holding a map, and I would welcome them to Boston by walking up and saying, "Gee, can I help you find something?" Now when I do that, they look at me and they wonder what it is I really have on my mind. So all of this data is now integrated in ways that have changed the way we think about the city, and in a fundamental way challenge us to rethink a simple zoning model or a simple physical planning model. And innovation, it is my view, and we will talk about it on May 6th and 7th, innovation means doing a lot more than simply designing a really cool artifact in the environment. It means changing the way we think about and experience this compact city full of engaged and smart people who want to get around and use it 24/7 in ways that never would have been anticipated before. Thank you.
Good job.
It's interesting. My whole mission behind this was to kind of expand the discussion of innovation beyond the building, which Ted certainly has. When Gretchen approached me about this panel, I was literally in the middle of preparing an ABX proposal on expressive and bold design in the city. So it's a topic that is, very much on my radar screen. Let's see if this works. So I wasn't at the Chamber of Commerce breakfast, but I combed through Mayor Walsh's speech and found this: let's build inspiration in our landscape. Now, I think he was speaking figuratively about our urban landscape, but as a landscape architect, I find frequently the landscape in the city, not just the boring buildings, but the landscape to have a very tepid character. And that while not every landscape needs to be a foreground landscape, that there is room within the conversation for an expressive, energetic, bold, imaginative landscape. And so I just wanted to pull out a few quotes from the speech. I won't read through all of this, but this is from Mayor Walsh's Chamber of Commerce speech. Our city's built environment should reflect the culture of imagination. We can balance the old and new. Let's make bold design part of the conversation. So I challenge every developer working in our city to take design to a new level. Reach beyond your comfort zone. Boston's design community is a driving force in our creative economy. Invite these innovators to dream up new images and icons. Innovators, images, icons, inspiration, and imagination. So one of the questions, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. One of the questions is, why? Why, with such an incredible landscape heritage, do we have, okay landscape in the city? And I think it's both cause and effect. We live in this shadow of excellence of Olmsted and of the brownstone, and that sort of becomes our de facto fallback. But even for Olmsted was innovating. He was imagining. It was not a natural landscape he was creating. It was a naturalistic landscape based on the English naturalistic landscape tradition. This slide of the Central Park competition that Olmsted and Vaux eventually won, you can see the differences between the two entries. The top, the naturalistic English landscape style, and the bottom, sort of a concorpio of topiary. And not only do these have a very different stylistic expression, but you can imagine that the experience and the practices within these places would be very different. So, well, I don't think that, particularly in the landscape, but I also think in architecture, form is not innocent. Form carries cues, and form and space carries cues and ways to experience the city. So what are some of the possibilities of landscapes of our time and place? If Olmsted, or if we are designing in this time, what are examples of landscapes from other places? Clearly the High Line in New York is one such example. Incredibly expensive, incredibly hard to maintain, but but a landscape that is really bringing the pleasure and experience of promenading in the city back into the conversation, of adults going out and just enjoying a landscape, not just kids. Another example, and one thing I wanted to point out is there isn't an inkling of, of terra firma in many of the landscapes that I'm talking about. Another example of a landscape that really is about pleasure and experience and exuberance in the city is Sugar Beach in Toronto. Easy to maintain, but really, not at all naturalistic, but really responding to fundamental ways that people enjoy and take great pleasure in the city, and works all year round. Also in Toronto, the cardiovascular wave deck, one of the West 8 projects, maybe a little bit sort of over the top in terms of exuberance, but really introducing a different way of experiencing the city that is about pleasure and exuberance. And while I think we have very sort of well-designed examples of landscapes in recent years, and even sort of our toe into innovation, I wouldn't say that these were extremely imaginative and expressive landscapes, not responding to the full call, the full challenge from the mayor. Although I think there's a real hunger for this. If we start thinking about the incredibly successful programming of the Greenway and of the Lawn on D, how the events on the Lawn on D, the temporary events, become such a draw and such an excuse to go out and really enjoy our city, that I think there is also room. I think we're starting to move in the direction of room for permanent pleasure in the experience of the city. And so what I actually just wanted to go through 3 more examples of projects which I have been involved in, of ways where in every project we're trying to create imaginative, expressive, innovative landscapes, but that are always a perfect fit to the context and the times of the place. So this was a project that I worked on when I was at Martha Schwartz's office, a project in the Dublin Docklands development area, which was kind of the equivalent of the Innovation District. This was a landscape where the landscape was going to be built prior to the surrounding buildings. So the landscape was signaling the urban vibrancy. It was helping craft the identity for the place. And the building that was going to go there after the landscape again was a theater. So the idea became to bring that magic of the theater, the red carpet of the theater, out into the square and take it up into the 3rd dimension. In this case, these light columns, we couldn't, it was on a parking garage again, there was no real ground. We couldn't support trees. So the light poles became the actor that mediated the scale between the pedestrian and the surrounding buildings. You can see, and then the design, I'm just clicking through a few things quickly. But also, because the landscape had to play this provocative protagonist role, the lights were interactive. And then again, it was a very highly programmed place. And if you Google, I just pulled this off Flickr, there are thousands of images, probably most of them by one person actually, on Flickr of this square in use in various different ways. So this is some sort of psychedelic dance party that took place there. So moving closer to home, this is not a public landscape, it's a private landscape on top of the Natick Mall. Again, most of the projects we do as landscape architects, most of the projects we work on are on constructed ground. And in this project was a 1.2 acre green roof on top of the Natick Mall. It was a project that was going to be the amenity space of the people living in the mall. And so it was really designed for the texture and experience of being within the place, but also very much recognizing that landscapes are also to be looked at. And this, in a downtown location, in addition to its sustainable, the sustainable qualities of a green roof, but in a downtown condition, looking down on the landscape is almost as experience as looking up. And that visual experience is something that we should, I really believe we should experience and enjoy. So again, not pretending that this is a landscape on the ground, but trying to recreate the experiences of the texture, the richness, the materials, the putting green. But you can see once you're actually on the landscape itself, it has a very, very different character. And it's creating a number of different spaces really about that kind of being there, experiencing the feel of the place. And finally, I'll click on to the last site. We were the landscape architects of this project, which was for Mass College of Art on Huntington Avenue. Our site in this case was a road and a very, very tiny slice of land that was above the major sewage infrastructure of the city of Boston. Actually, the three pipes converge directly underneath this site. We worked very closely with the students on student focus groups, trying to figure out what they really needed. And we had all these what they really wanted. We had all these sort of great ideas, and ultimately they wanted two things. They wanted a landscape that spoke of their expressive identity, and they wanted places to hang out. So that became the idea. Places for individuals, groups, and we created a series of seat walls around these planted landscapes, trying to enrich the complexity of the space to provide a number of different places to sit, but at the same time providing intimacy and enjoyment and real pleasure. So the seat walls, it's an art school, the seat walls go a little bit wacky. They undulate both in plan and in section. On the ground plane is this sort of expressive canvas of paving that also works as a rumble strip to thwart skateboarders. But still within that, really responding with the detailing of the design to both energy, but also sort of richness in visual and tactile experience. And that this is someone reading it right along the edge of Huntington Avenue almost. And then seeing how taking that paving across the private way, across the road, is not only expanding the site, but it's saying we're claiming this roadway as part of the pedestrian realm. So cars can come on it, but they're coming onto our territory. And then finally, particularly in an art school in New England, the experience of the night and the experience of the weather becomes very significant, particularly if you think landscapes are about coming together with people, but they're also about enjoying them yourself. So it isn't kind of a one-way experience. The landscape is giving back to you as you're moving through it. A little bit of snow, a lot more snow. And this was last winter. This wasn't even this winter. We didn't get down and photograph it this year with a lot more snow. And finally, back to where the students are living. The view from above. Thank you.
We had a conference call last week with this panel, and it was just so refreshing to talk to this group, such a talented group. And we talked about innovation and how do you stimulate innovation and how does innovative design take place. And a few things came to mind for me that I'd like to discuss with you really briefly. And the first that we talked about is innovation is hard, make no mistake. And sometimes in our hallways, we believe that innovation is absolutely key for our organization. There's different formats of development in the world, and some developers choose to build a building, sell it, move on. Some get out of the business. Ours is a format that we plan on our company being evergreen forever. It's going to continue to go on. So it's imperative that we continue to innovate all the time and have that as part of our culture. But sometimes in our office, when you'll hear about innovation is very, very beep hard. It is very hard, but something that's been a really good pointer for us to help us to become better innovators is an author by the name of Roger Martin, who I'm a huge fan of. For those of you who don't know him, he wrote the Business by Design, The Opposable Mind, and I really think he's the Peter Drucker of the next, call it the knowledge age. And what Martin says is that if you want to be an innovator, you got to have a stance. And what he means by that is you got to have a set of beliefs. And let me just give you some of the things he talks about in several of his books. Innovation requires a stance. Stance is how you see the world, how you see yourself in the world. A stance brings consciousness. It brings a set of assumptions. It's guidance. And when it's a powerful stance, it's hard to resist and it's hard to divert. Your stance guides what tools you also acquire to choose to accumulate, which in turn drives experience. An accumulation of experience then goes back and informs your stance and refines your stance. And really, in a way, what Martin says is something that I think Drucker had said in the past is, there's a tendency to think and do rather than think about how we think. This has been really helpful for us at Boston Properties, and I think a couple good examples for you are the first, which is Atlantic Wharf. When we took on this project, we had bought it from another developer who was breaking up their company and splitting up the assets and leaving New England. And we inherited a set of plans and a team that was on it. But what we got really quick was a stance. We had a stance that we brought to the table, and we also had a stance that the city of Boston had. And both of us agreed that this was going to be Boston's first green skyscraper. First green skyscraper. And what we decided was we wanted to go beyond what was being, call it requested. It's still not a law, but it was a request that it be LEED certified. We wanted to be platinum. We wanted to exceed all the other goals. We also had a desire to fit in with the surroundings here at this location. We're on the waterfront, the famous waterfront. Next to us is the Boston Tea Party where this took place. So we're on a historic place. We had a stance. And our discussions with the city of Boston, with the BRA, at the time it was Jimmy Hunt running that, the group for environment, which I believe is that within the BRA, Ted, or is that separate? Separate. Jim Hunt played a huge role with us on the sustainability part, and his team with Carl and Brian and so many people. We talked a lot about our stance. And our stance implied us to do certain things. And one of the things that was just such an easy innovation when I look back, but was again so hard, was one that we call the rain harvest system. Now you can't see all the details on this, but what the city requested us to do was, instead of taking the water that we collect from our gutters and blowing it down the city of Boston's sewer system, which is already overly taxed, and when the storms hit, it creates havoc for the city of Boston. The team at the city said, could you guys do a rain harvest system? And we hadn't done one of these before on any of our buildings. So as we went through it, we found that it actually was very hard because nobody had done it on our team. And it required a different set of disciplines, a different type of muscle. And what we have with this system, real briefly, is just 72 different spots that we collect from, rain when it rains, and over a half mile of piping that collects everything. We take it into a tank that's 60 feet below sea level in our parking garage. It can hold 60,000 gallons of water. And we take that, collect it, automatically filter it, and take out the environmental pollutants, and then we use it for our systems. Now, it sounds easy, but at the time, I didn't realize that you got to have a lot of people sign off on these things. Insurance people actually have to sign off on it for the people that are drawing these things. It became a real challenge, but we kept pushing and kept pushing. With a great set of architects and civil engineers, we put together our system. So what does it do? It saves us 12.5 million gallons of water that we're not pulling from the city or dumping through the sewer system. An amazing number. Let's put that in kind of life terms. It's 19 Olympic swimming pools a year. Every year, 19 Olympic swimming pools. A small innovation, but I contend, like Martin, it's because we knew what our stance was. Now, another bit of design that took place was the day after we closed on this property, and Phil's here, one of our architects at CVT. This is what the Boston Globe put out. I think it was Steve Bailey who wrote this. And he said, "Alien on the Park," and this was the design that we inherited. And this was his quote. So there was a bit of ruckus that day. Not only did we had spent a lot of money the day before, but this came out, and it made a lot of commotion within Boston Properties office. And then we got a call from the mayor who said, "I agree with Steve Bailey." And he wanted us to relook at the design. Wow. And here we were ready to go. We were ready to kick off our project. So we stepped back and we thought about what we wanted to do. And it was actually really hard because we thought about how do we change this? How do we switch it up and still do all the things that we wanted to do? Now this is when the story gets a little funny and when the architect in me wanted to kick in. And you know what a developer is really a C student who couldn't get into architecture school. So this is when Phil and everybody at CBT humored me. But we were talking about what should the shapes be. And one of the themes was, well, we're on the water. Why shouldn't the shapes be reminiscent of something about Boston's history and then also nautical and on the water? Weeks went by. We had several different drawings that we worked with. And then one weekend, I was on the Cape. I live 2 doors down from this in Osterville. It's the Osterville Historical Society. Now, as is my tradition on Friday night, there's a glass of Kettle One on the rocks, no olives involved, and a cigar. Sometimes a couple of those Kettle Ones. And then I take a walk downtown to the little village and have dinner with my family at this place called Five Bays Bistro. So as I walk by here, you'll see that the logo has on it a small sailboat. Well, that sailboat is called, affectionately referred to as the Wiano Senior, for those of you from Cape Cod. And this little boat is just revered by thousands of people. It's a classic boat. In fact, you probably see a lot of pictures when you see the old pictures of Jack Kennedy with Jackie. It's typically on a Wiano Senior. So that's the shape of the Wiano Senior. And over dinner and maybe another glass of Merlot, Phil, you can start to see the shape of Atlantic Wharf. Now, that following Monday, I went to CBT's office and I threw down this napkin that was sketched out, and everybody's, well, that's great. What is that? And I go, it's Wiano Senior. That's our image. That's what we can go with. Is there a way we could put this together? Now, here's where the real artist came in, and Phil quickly drew this. And you can see the shape of our building. Those buildings at the bottom, or the square, or the hull of the boat, are actually the existing Russia Wharf building and then what was the warehouse. Today, what you see as the antenna that everybody refers to on the building is actually the mask of a Wiano Senior. So inspiration and design can come from many different sectors, and we often have people say to us, why do I like the shape of Atlantic Wharf so well? Well, in a lot of ways, it's the primitive yet subtle, yet simple design of a very simple sailboat on the water. And you can see our mask as it goes up the side of the building there in the hull. And it's really been a fabulous way for us to continue to look at the Atlantic Wharf. We have a stance, and the stance continues, and we continue to work on innovation at the project. Some of you may have heard presentations we've done on our water fence called the Aqua Fence. After Sandy, we sent a team down to New York, and we found the best principles that took place, and many of them were just preparedness, right? The best, though, were the buildings that had sandbags around them. We thought maybe we could do it in a little better way, and the Romans were using sandbags, and maybe we can improve on that. So we put some summer interns on it, and they found this Aqua Fence. And this is 800 linear feet of fence that can be put up in 174 minutes. And downstairs when you leave, you'll see the portion of the Aqua Fence put up. It's quite remarkable. But it continues, the innovation. As we look forward, our stance for 888 Boylston is, again, sustainability. And we want this to be Boston's most sustainable building. This is a building that's next to the Prudential Center, our last site. It'll be the smallest building that I think we've done in Boston, but yet I think it'll be the most important because it'll be so sustainable. 13 different innovations that are listed here, but quickly, we're calling it our Workspace 2.0. Will consume 45% less electricity than the average building. Here's some of the components: solar panels and wind turbines. It'll be the first building in Boston commercial with extensive wind turbines on the roof of the building. Water, We're going to take the lessons we took from here and apply it there. Rain harvest system again. Daylighting is our next big adventure, and we will have no columns in this space on the interior, and we'll be able to have the lights off 60% more of the time. Air quality as well is another big benchmark for us and where we're going. Outdoors areas on the top of the building. Why can't office buildings for commercial office users be fun? Let's face it, there's great views up there. And then our architecture itself. And I would tell you that we're already getting teased and criticized, and I'm already getting people to say, what's going to happen when the wind turbine doesn't work or it breaks? Oh, it looks like the top of a mixer used in the kitchen. What a stance does for you, though, is it gives you courage. When you have a stance and you know what you stand for and what you're doing, it can really lead to more innovation, but maybe more importantly, it's the courage. Because let's face it, to be innovative, you've got to stand out, and there's nothing more powerful in life than our desire to fit in. What do parents want for their children? To fit in when they go to school? Well, innovation requires you to stand out. And what a stance does is it allows you to stand out. It allows you to break from what Dr. King called the tyranny of the status quo. So when people are teasing us and the criticism will come, we're going to proudly look at that because that building represents sustainability to us in the future. Thank you.
Appreciate the invitation this evening. I'm the outlier, the non-Boston guy here. So I've brought a couple of projects from elsewhere in the country to talk about, and I don't know, I've always heard that you can't call yourself innovative, only somebody else can do that. And I think that that's part of the challenge of that word, is that it kind of has a presumptive condition. And what I really like to talk about is how do you tackle problem solving? And I think the key to that for us is always trying to say, well, maybe you just have to change the problem. So I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 basic things that will read through these projects. One, I think, is you have to understand the problem enough to change it. You have to refuse boundaries. You have to understand what expectations are and be prepared to modify those. We believe you have to work very much across disciplines, and that silos are places where you get locked into your own presumptions. And you have to marshal a wide range of partners, both within the client side and the design side. And that means that there's a substantial amount of integration to the point that some of the boundaries disappear and the partners change hats. So just very quickly, we're working on President's Park in the Ellipse in Washington, D.C., incredibly important place, one of the formal places for First Amendment protests on the south side of the White House, that has gone through incredibly different kinds of programmatic change, deterioration, and although it's got an incredible history as an idea of a casual and formal space that is about the nation and the White House, it's been overtaken by security concerns and series of barriers and elements that have changed the fundamental operation of that space over time. And so very simply, as we began to approach the project, one of the things we said is that the condensation and the overlay of layers of security have to be removed, and in fact let space become one of the barriers and take the 2 levels of protection and prevention and spread them apart. Our client is both Secret Service and National Park Service, and so it's got that dual hat of public use and protective. And to that end, the one thing that we can get both agencies to agree on is that we have to produce a fundamentally open and public space. And we believe that if we're going to make use of security measures to change the public realm, then you actually have to improve the public realm, not simply make it more secure. So with one relatively simple move where we chose to raise the ellipse just a few thousandths of an inch per foot over its dimension, but give us a dimension on the far side to actually move a protective barrier, architecturalize a form that's been a part of the Washington landscape for a long time, gives us both robust athletic lawn to serve the public good, a security barrier that keeps vehicles at an extreme perimeter from that end of the White House, and a new set of drainage swales to manage the surface drainage off of the parking lot that also occupies part of that site. So that the move becomes something that fundamentally changes the ellipse, but allows it to retain its place in the formal character and geometry of Washington, D.C. I don't watch a lot of TV, but when I got this first project, I had to go watch The Wire because it's in East Baltimore. An unbelievable neighborhood that existed was down to about 15% occupancy when it was made into an urban renewal district. And this sits just about a 6-minute walk from the Johns Hopkins Medical Center. So you've got first-class, first-world healthcare right next to one of the most challenging neighborhoods in the country. And an incredible visionary head of the urban renewal district said, we are never going to be able to build housing here or recover the neighborhood until people want to be here. And so we were retained to build what was decided had to be Baltimore City's best public school right in the middle of the neighborhood. And part of the idea was that you can't come in and land like a satellite. You actually have to understand the neighborhood and come in and be a part of the neighborhood. And so even the form, the character, the typology of the school needed to belong to the neighborhood from the very beginning. So we partnered with the Johns Hopkins Department of Education, who subsequently got retained to run the school by contract, to change the idea of the pedagogy for the school into a series of houses so that you're breaking down the entire school into student populations of 120 students, locate those houses, integrate public space and open space with all the educational spaces, align those green spaces, and let each one of those houses begin to have a presence and a purpose so that, in fact, the school experience for 700 students becomes changed into a school experience for 120 students, and that these places become owned and landmarks for the neighborhoods themselves. We've also included substantial public amenities, gymnasiums, social services, auditoriums, and pieces, and build the building as part of the neighborhood, respecting and enabling it so that the mass, the scale, the character, the history of the neighborhood that had an incredible social street when it was owned becomes the social space of the school itself. And the vibrancy that existed in the neighborhood in terms of the presence of the stoop and the front and the alleyways, which were part of this neighborhood originally, now become part of the school as well. And that's a philosophy that works inside as well as outside the school, understanding that materiality can be contextual, but also be something completely new and different. In the history of a very masonry neighborhood, we developed a new precast module that would allow the school to be built quickly so that it both belongs, but it creates a new materiality for the neighborhood. And the school exists with the neighborhood and has begun the rejuvenation. We've already seen market rate development taking place all around the school. One other example, also complex partnership, we got retained by a energy corporation in Oklahoma City that made the choice to relocate to downtown Oklahoma City. And we had a long conversation and actually talked about not doing a signature tower. But if you're going to, in fact, go into downtown Oklahoma City, how can you create a broader idea of what is a corporation headquarters and how its respect and responsibility and interchange with the city could actually take place? Oklahoma had an incredibly vibrant boom town early in the 20th century, but it also had stunning urban renewal, desolation, and depopulation. And so our principle was to say, don't come in and build your singular tower. Let's go in and actually build across multiple sites. Influence the city as broadly as you can with your people, your populations, your dollars, and your presence. And so the model on the far right became a principle for what we've called the Sandridge Commons, which lies between the red line, which is the primary commercial corridor and hospitality corridor of downtown, and the blue line, which is the sort of links all of the major civic spaces, so that we would coordinate with the city, include a public park as well as a whole series of private parcels, and develop a language of buildings that occupy in a collective way across the space a city that then the population itself is moving between buildings, and it's all linked by the highest quality public space. But Oklahoma City has a problem with public space, which is the weather is pretty terrible. And you have unbelievable wind, unbelievable hot summers, very cold winters, and we were challenged as to the principle of using public space as a connector for the corporate facilities. So working with Arup's environmental group, we began to study very seriously how we could actually impact and manage microclimate. And looking back, sometimes looking back is as good as looking forward, and there's incredible knowledge in the West and the Midwest about the introduction of the shelter belts from the 1930s. And so we imagined if this could come in and actually we could create a shelter belt equivalency within the downtown area of the multiple blocks of influence. And that the key thing about public space is you don't have to make everything good all the time, but you have to make a place that's really good almost any given season. So on the right are a half a dozen places. Some are in the sun, some are in the shade, some are out of the wind, some get a little breeze. And so if you begin to work and know that there's always a place you can go, people find those places on their own very quickly if you can develop them effectively and develop them scientifically. So test your ideas in the wind tunnel and really understand how you can introduce a new kind of landscape into the city environment that allows placemaking to happen in places with challenging weather. So it also means looking at what are the extremes, because in the end, what you need to do is you need to eliminate the extremes to make places work. And in this case, it was both wind shear off of an existing tall building as well as solar gain on the place. So we decided we needed to think about a place for shade and comfort, but the reality is full shade is never really quite right. The reason you like to be under a canopy of trees is that that shade is dynamic and it's shifting and it's adjustable. And so we built that shade with a series of layers of elements that actually could mimic that dynamic quality of actual shade from a tree canopy and create a major space that is also a gathering space and event space. It works whether you got 5 people in it or 300. And it means making spaces for intimacy as well as for collective space, making sure that at nighttime that intimacy is carried over into the lighting and the characteristic and the desirability of those places around, and to link those together with comprehensible and understandable intuitive circulation that makes a remarkable place that can last over time. Thank you very much.
Great job. I sleep better knowing there are people like you out there doing this. It is really refreshing. So, look, I have just one question to kind of kick things off, and then I hope we can hear from some of you. We went on a little longer tonight, so we're going to do a little shorter on the Q&A. But I'm glad we did, because that was absolutely terrific. And I guess I'll just kind of go to the elephant in the room or the gorilla in the room or whatever it is. You know, because you all alluded to it, really. Kind of like the why aren't we doing this question, right? With the undulating pathways and those things that, you know, and even in Brian's example, I mean, it's one building that's doing this amazing, innovative thing. There's one setup of that 3-foot water rise, and there's, you know, the platinum certified, I think just one building. Certainly when you started, there was only one. Is there still one, Brian?
There may be a couple now.
Maybe a couple now. But, you know, what is standing in the way of us doing these things in the city? And why does it take, or does it take, a mayor to say, go out and do this? And will we do it once we've heard that? Or what else what is the zeitgeist of doing things versus not doing things? Can any of you put your finger on it?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. As you heard earlier, I'm in love with Martin's stance, right? And I think that with the mayor's question, Mike, it creates a hope for a stance, and he's creating a stance by saying he wants bold architecture. And those subtle things are really important. So if we hearken back to when Mayor Menino asked us at Boston Properties to put a top on top of the building, it had to do with he was going around throughout the country at a mayor's conferences, and he's flying in places like Atlanta and looking down, and he saw tops of buildings that were inspiring. Or you go to New York and you see the Chrysler Building. And he came to us and said, would you guys do something like that? And we said, absolutely. We had never been asked, but the original design was for a flat top, right? That you'd see the HVAC units and everything else. And I think the mayor, like Mayor Menino, has taken a good cue in saying, let's create a stance for what we believe in as a city. And one of the things I'm intrigued with is our stance should be sustainability. We should be one of the most sustainable cities in the world. And you can add components to that that go along with it, but one of them is a call for just being bold and innovative. And I think that the challenge you have with, I'm a little bit of an architectural history fan, Mike, and one of the things you find is that when you look back at cities that did a bunch of bold things, it has to do with when they were in a call it explosive growth period. If you look at Chicago, the best architecture in Chicago took place when the city was exploding. And why? They were optimistic at that time, very optimistic. And we're going into a zone that I think Mayor Walsh has been so astute on, which is we're in a time in the knowledge age when incredible things are taking place here, and we have a reason to be optimistic, so let's have the buildings follow that. And in a lot of ways, it's like what Churchill said about first we shape the buildings and then the buildings shape us. We can do that in Boston. We're in an optimistic period. Let's be bolder than we've ever been.
Let me push back, because a lot of people say we can't do that in Boston. It costs too much. The cost of land is too much. The cost of development is too much. The labor unions add too much cost to it. The cost of permitting adds too much time and therefore costs too much. Is there something in Boston that won't let us move forward? Is there something preventing us from doing that? Ted, you see projects coming before you at the Boston Redevelopment Authority. Is there a renewed interest in your developers appearing before you who are now coming in with this innovative design and saying, I've done it. I've brought you beautiful design. Now approve me.
I haven't yet seen, by the time it gets to the board level, I haven't yet seen that kind of innovation. I would like to. And it's not yet clear to me as to whether that has been drained out of the projects because of a lack of imagination on the part of developers or the arduous process that designers and developers have to go through in order to get by multiple committees and community entities and groups. I've heard, for example, that the simplest project has to go through 24 meetings, and all of that adds expense and time, and much of that is driven by what I would say are small-scale politics. Particular individuals in particular neighborhoods have a particular agenda that's all about stopping something from happening. And in that regard, sometimes you need the creative city official to step up to say, this is actually within the context of what this neighborhood is about. The Apple Store, for example, coming into being on Boylston Street, right, was a very radical step for Boylston Street, and it's across from your project. Yep. And it was a small number of people and one individual within City Hall who said, this is something that both fits within the context and is innovative in an appropriate way in this neighborhood. But I think we're still trying to figure out what the key impediments are. And it's not just about lack of creativity, because one of the great disappointments that I always have is to travel around the country or elsewhere in the world and to see work by Boston architects that is so much more exciting and creative than the work that they do in Boston. So it's not a lack of will and integrity and imagination on the part of designers. There are intrinsic points of inertia within our own system, and we need to start to call them for what they are. I mean, lots of people have said we have a very boring waterfront. Well, let's name the names of who the architects were who produced that.
Let's flog them
And
in
and
the
let's
public
ask
square, right?
what it would take to get them to produce more creative work.
All right, all right. Shauna, jump in.
Well, actually, I'm saying the same thing that Ted is saying, but in a different way. I think there are too many gray cells in this city. I've been on so many community meetings with such an incredible wealth of really, really intelligent people that can debate endlessly the details of very specific things over and over and over and over again, and then on to the next meeting, and then on to the next meeting. And eventually, it's pretty hard to keep up the tenacity of the stance of a strong design after such a degree of debate, because there are many different perspectives on looking at a building, looking at a landscape. And so I think the process that Ted was alluding to, not just within the government itself, but also the community process, well, I think it's actually incredibly valid. I think that there does need to be a way to restructure it so that there is the opportunity to take some risks. Because if we can only get the brownstones and Olmsted, it's going to be very, very nice, but we're not going to get the innovative of our time, of 2015.
Okay. Let us open this up. Someone must have a comment right there in the back. Yes, sir.
I just want to say, it's not just, hi, I'm Andrew Falkenstein, I'm an architect in Brookline. It's never just the client or the architect, it's the marriage of the two. And you could have a client who wants something, but it maybe has a relationship with a service-oriented architecture firm and goes to that service-oriented architecture firm that doesn't get the type of innovative design that a more design-oriented firm would offer. And in the reverse case, a client who hires a design-oriented architect but can't see the vision and can't work as part of the team, certainly I think is a big part. And again, echoing what Sean has said, I'll go out on a limb and push it. Too much democracy in the design process, the approval process is not a good thing. You look at your Robert Moses and your Baron Haussmann, and democracy at a certain point does not add anything to the design. It simply adds to the discussion. And I think that if you had perhaps a role of the BRA that was a little bit more authoritarian, but leadership by the elite, by the educated, I think you would get some of that avant-garde, innovative architecture that you can't always get when you open it up to the entire city.
Okay. Well, this is we're hearing a theme here. It's a runaway community here. I'd love to hear the other side if someone has it. We have a comment over here and then one over here. So let's go.
It's just to the same point.
Yeah.
My name is Laura Wyckoff, and I'm an architect in Boston, and I've worked with a lot of projects that have gone through the BRA and the Board of Appeals. And when you're dealing with groups, you need to be able to get people to understand what you're presenting. So you have to be able to get that you have to be able to get that understanding from a group, and so it sort of comes to like a lowest common denominator in sort of, not in a literal sense, but if you're introducing a lot of things that people do not understand, then it makes them uncomfortable and it makes it harder for them to support the project, in my experience.
Okay. Yes.
My name is Cy Mintz, and back in the 60s that you referred to, 1964, I was at that time the director of what's known as the Downtown Waterfront Faneuil Hall Urban Renewal Project. The difference between 64 and where we are now is that we had leadership in two places. We had leadership with the mayor at that time. That was John Collins, that nobody ever expected to be the mayor, if you know anything about that history. And we had a development administrator by the name of Ed Logue, who organized and formed what is the BRA, with the power of eminent domain, which has its problems but has its pluses. And what happened was he created a staff. We had a staff of designers that really were an integral part, and not just, and this is no criticism of developers. One just sadly passed away today. His name is Norm Leventhal, and he talked in the article in the Globe about 123 Center Plaza. Well, absolutely he developed that building, but the form of the building, the way that building evolved, okay, was a combination of the BRA being in a more active role. So what I would suggest, if I could, is the fact that this mayor appears to be far more open to ideas, even the fact that he talks about innovation. We've not heard that word outside of innovation in engineering and new businesses. We've not heard that word in architecture, landscape design, etc. And if we continue to push that and get our leadership, and I include you, Mr. Landsmark, even though I know your role as a member of the BRA, but I've not heard those words even at the BRA. And so my belief is that we need to hear much more about innovation. We need to hear much more about the kind of quality, the kind of design that architects, and we have a lot of great ones all around here. We educate them. Many of them, fortunately, stay here, but they do their best work somewhere else. And part of that is because we're so focused on tradition and the way things are today, because I'm attending meetings and have been on the re-looking at the whole what's known as the Wharf District, which is from Long Wharf all the way over to the Northern Avenue Bridge. And when you see the advisory committee, which has been established, and you try to listen to that and try to work as creative people that I'm sure many of you are, in order to do that, you've got to have the thrust of the leader. In this case, it's the mayor, and the mayor has to focus on that.
So we got it. That's good. Rob, bail us out here for a minute. So you're hearing from the crowd. They want top-down authoritarian development. They want urban renewal. They want make us do it, right? So you had to have experienced something different in your developments as you worked through the community process. Are we all wrong here? What's going on?
I would be hesitant to malign community action too quickly, because I believe, and I love that Brian opened up with the issue of the stance, because I think when you are doing something that is really good and the story is really clear, communities are not a problem. If you're doing mediocre stuff and it's kind of schlocky and it's quick and how fast can we get through, communities are going to beat you up. And the more intelligent the community is, the more you're going to get hit. And I think that it's telling that community activism, to me, is not a problem. It's telling you haven't got yourself in top order yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We got one right over here. Any other comments?
Hi, I'm Mike Davis, also an architect. I guess we're the majority here tonight. But I was struck by, I think an object lesson came from Mr. Rogers, your partner in your project in Baltimore, because you spent a lot of time talking about the program and the context. And I think that we have in Boston such a public investment in the context. I mean, I think the context is a sacred cow to us. I think we can only imagine a kind of a binary relationship. Either it supports the context or it breaks from the context. And if it breaks from the context, we have a hard time accepting it. If it supports the context, that's good, because it'll keep things the way they are. But I think that what your project did is you educated the audience, the city, the public, to actually shift the context, to improve the context, and use architecture to do that. And you characterize that as innovation, and that's a hard conversation to have. And I don't think in the public design review process, we really have that conversation too much. I mean, it happens occasionally. I mean, down in Dudley Square most recently, the municipal office building is one where the investment in the context wasn't as strong. Maybe people said, all right, we need something. The context needs some work here. There's room for improvement here. And so the architecture really stepped up. But the downtown, or the waterfront, the Back Bay, we don't have that conversation about taking the context and improving it or shifting it or moving it into a new century. We just don't do that here. And I think maybe that's why it's hard. Maybe that's why innovation is hard, because it's a complicated conversation. You really have to engage people at that level, at a kind of an intellectual gray cell kind of level in order to get that point across.
Innovation is hard. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where the question was, but I appreciate the comment, certainly. But it's also that, I'll step in my own Boston pothole now, but, context is so much more than brick arches. And, it's scale, and it's rhythm, and it's program, and it's all kinds of those things. And I think that you do need to get beyond the idea of contextuality being something looking like something else, and it can work like something else. It can think, it can perform, it can do lots of other sort of things, and that's where the example from Baltimore was that it really we needed, and we got through the entire community process there because they felt like the school belonged to the neighborhood. Meanwhile, it had none of the actual direct physical characteristics of what was there before. And so I think it is that challenge to overcome and decide that, we're going to do things, with new materials, new technologies, new pieces, new programs, and that they work together.
And the one thing I guess I would add to that is that context is determined not exclusively by physical form. That's why we need to talk about who's there, what their expectations are, what the population needs, and what the clients 20 or 30 years from now may need, so that if there's an understanding, as with your project in Baltimore, that the context evolves, and that as designers, we play a major role in accelerating or catalyzing that kind of evolution, and then things can change. We're not always going to be a 19th century city. I had a conversation a few weeks ago with Peter Eisenman, who had submitted one of the proposals for the new Boston City Hall. And his was not one that had been selected, but we talked about boldness, and one can like City Hall or not, but I think we would all agree that it was a very bold statement that was made in precisely the time that Cy is referring to. And it was his belief, and he's going to be in town in another couple of weeks speaking, but it was his belief that a building like the Boston City Hall could never get approved today. And so the question is, why is that? And what do we need to do in order to create a foundation that recognizes that context changes, and that lots of people weigh in on what the nature of that change will be, and lots of factors, economic or demographic or what have you, determine how you change context. And then it becomes a question of how you put differential weights on the things that are important as the city moves forward and rebrands itself.
So I want to skip back to Mike and Rob's comment for a moment. I love this project. It is an incredibly smart, beautifully designed project. Not just from a visual perspective, but from what I understand spatially, the way it fits into the context. It was a pretty beat up community when you went in. So it's not that it is as tight a community as doing a project in the Back Bay, where there's a lot of investment in keeping things the way that they are. Not only financial investment, but emotional investment. And so I think to relate the two is not exactly fair. I think that overall, I think one of the biggest issues is that we actually, as a society, do not have we have a highly developed visual literacy. Our music literacy is extremely high. Our film literacy is extremely high. But when we start talking about our visual literacy, particularly of the built environment, I can tell you, my mother would not be able to tell you the difference between good architecture and bad architecture, or good and mediocre. And most people don't have that ability. So I think, in general, we need to increase the dialogue, increase the literacy, whichever ways we can. But I think we also need to, and I'm not exactly advocating for, for a benign dictator or a benign dictatorship, but we do need to increase to include the educated client body, whether that's the government agency, whether it's some other element, into the discourse. So it is not only based on the loudest voice, but it is about a more educated voice. In addition, and I'm not talking about this it being one person or one voice, but in addition to the conversation, because I do, as I said, there are a number of very, very good things that come out of the community process. But if it only becomes about avoiding the bad, then I don't think we're achieving what we really want to. Why all of you are here, actually.
Okay, time for one last comment. Steve Britton, I saw your hand, architect here in the city, and then we're gonna wrap this up. Steve, what do you have to tell us?
It better be a good comment. But
It better be. This is it. This is really.
Just a thought, really. Coming back to the question of why we struggle to find good design, and I was sitting here listening to all of this and thinking that because it's so difficult to get projects developed and built in the city. It's hard for developers to make choices for diversity in architects because put this as a question. Is it better to go with the insurance policy of firms that have proven themselves in the city, and therefore perhaps a lot of the buildings start to look like the same buildings from the same firms? So perhaps the BRA can play a role, the mayor can play a role in helping the diversity and selection of architects and reducing some of the risk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a comment. If anyone wants to respond.
Well, I would just add to that the federal government has found a number of ways, and not only through competitions, but through the creation of incentives to bring new, innovative designers into the process of designing courthouses, for example, and other major public buildings. The federal courthouse here in Boston would not have come into being had it not been for special incentives being created to push the limits of courthouse design. And I think we can do the same in the city by seeing to it that we ask ourselves the hard questions about what we want out of innovation, who is served, and how that helps to project to a wider world the sense that we have that we are an innovative city, but you don't generally know that when your plane is gliding into Logan Airport.
Mike, one of the things along the lines of change for the future, I love Ted's flowchart, and one of the columns said you had big data was in there. And I'm really hopeful about this because big data could provide us with facts that can counter the status quo in terms of so many times when you're in public formats, there's things that are brought up that are just anecdotal and the person's opinion versus factually based things like, do people really like it here? And as one example, I brought up that at the Prudential Center, I think we have one of the greatest pocket parks, as Jane Addams would say, that it was, and somebody said, that's not a pocket park. I go, well, do you know how many people use that pocket park every week, as I'd call it? She had no idea. It was thousands of people, and we can tell that because we've got the data to show it. And I think there's going to be times in the future when we can provide scientific evidence of what makes great places in the future. But I would submit that that's going to be something that all the architects in the world are going to have to be open-minded about. We had a student at MIT speak at our Boston Properties University that we hold each year last September, and he has a program that can rate place based on perception of crime. And it was a wonderful presentation. It was just fascinating. And what was really interesting is the perception of crime is universal. It doesn't matter what country you come from. That was fascinating. But afterwards, the people that were against this program the most were the architects. So I think we all got to keep an open mind about this in the future.
All right. Well, listen, we May 6th and 7th. Where are you doing it? Do you know yet?
Faneuil Hall and here.
Faneuil Hall and here.
Yes.
Okay.
Starting on the evening of the 6th with a plenary session at Faneuil Hall, and then the actual sessions will take place here.
Okay, and Mark, Sarah, Gretchen, what do we have next coming up here at this space?
The next Design in Boston will be the first Monday of May. June. June, every 2 months. When
Okay.
there's no snowstorm. And it'll be on the cultural plan.
A cultural plan, okay. And so sign up on our Twitter feed, or mine, or any of us here. We will tweet, we'll let you know. Thank you for coming tonight, and listen, thanks for your participation. Have a great night. Thank you, everyone.
You can go to parts of this city and all cities where those values don't exist, and yet the desire for beneficial open space and or necessary retail to improve street environments is imposed in places where the values don't exist to support it, and therefore corners are cut and or the product that actually gets built doesn't the synergies don't exist. It's easy to point to the waterfront and say that it does because they do. But there are a lot of places
but the
that
waterfront
don't.
was never what it was today.